Rupert Lowe, please.
So I've got a question, I think, for the Permanent Secretary. I mean, do you agree with me that good data is the basis on which good decisions are made rather than bad decisions? That's how I've always run my businesses. I mean, do you agree that's a logical summary of how people make good decisions rather than bad decisions?
It is entirely.
So can you explain to me then, I mean, I have had literally hundreds of NHS whistleblowers. You probably know I've set up something called Restore Britain. We've got our own whistleblowing line. We've literally had hundreds of NHS staff whistleblowers, I mean hundreds, who've contacted us about the lack of English language causing issues, as well as foreign staff not holding appropriate skills and qualifications. Now, these people, these are doctors, they're nurses, they're midwives, they're managers, they're surgeons, they're everybody within the NHS. It's not just one subset. And what they're frightened of actually reporting it to the NHS for the fear of the wokerati who run the NHS now, their fear of reprisal, so they've come to us. So, I mean, I'd like to know, you must accept the fact that we need the data. So what data do you hold, basically, on the correlation between foreign nationals and medical malpractice taking place within the NHS? You must look at all this data. You can't fear being called racist or anything else. We need raw data for the taxpayers' benefit and also for the patient's benefit.
With yours, the doctor, thank you.
Well, I think, so I wouldn't want to be considered part of a wokerati, but I mean, we are very animated about issues around inequalities and so on. And we are hand reading, for example, and to the point about digital, with machine learning, we will get far more data from those 3 million incidents that I'm referring to. But we are hand reading the death and severe cases, thousands of those a year. And what is not coming out of that is that there is an issue around people who've come from abroad and language and communication. There is undoubtedly communication issues around inequalities in harm, and we know that some groups are affected by harm more, partly because of communication, and communication is undoubtedly important in safety. But what we're not seeing from those reports we're reading is some of the things that you're describing people whistleblowing to.
You disagree with these whistleblowers?
So I'm not disagreeing with whistleblowers because I haven't spoken to them, and it's important that people feel able to speak up. And one of the things that we are very focused on is the concept of psychological safety and people being able to step forward and talk to us about these things.
What you're watching here is not just a policy exchange. It's a carefully structured political confrontation built around framing, control of evidence, and competing definitions of truth. On the surface, Rupert Lowe opens the discussion with what appears to be a simple logical principle. Good data leads to good decisions. But that opening is not neutral. It is a setup. Because once that principle is accepted, everything that follows is designed to force the NHS leadership into a binary position, either provide the exact data set he is demanding or appear as if something is being hidden. From that moment, the exchange stops being about healthcare administration and becomes about narrative control. Lowe then escalates the pressure by introducing a highly charged claim, hundreds of whistleblowers, allegedly reporting issues involving language barriers and qualifications among foreign staff. This is a strategic rhetorical move. The number hundreds is not just informational, it is psychological amplification. It signals scale, urgency, and systemic failure, even though no direct evidence is presented within the exchange itself. It shifts the emotional weight of the discussion before any technical verification can happen. At this stage, the argument is no longer operating in a purely factual space. It is now operating in what can be described as perception-driven governance criticism, where anecdotal aggregation is used to suggest systemic collapse. Then comes the turning point, the demand for a statistical correlation between nationality and medical malpractice. This is where the framing becomes extremely important, because the question is not simply, what does the data show, but specifically, can you confirm a causal relationship between two politically sensitive variables? And this is where institutional responses typically diverge from political narratives. The NHS representative does not engage with the framing as presented. Instead, they redirect the conversation into broader categories. inequality in health outcomes, communication challenges, patient safety systems, and large-scale data interpretation through machine learning and internal review processes. This is not accidental deflection. It is institutional language designed to resist oversimplification of complex systems. In other words, one side is trying to compress reality into a single measurable link, while the other is insisting that reality is multi-causal, layered, and not reducible to a single explanatory variable. That mismatch is the core tension of the entire exchange. Another important element is the introduction of woke culture and fear of reprisal as explanatory frameworks. This shifts the argument away from data entirely and into institutional psychology. It suggests that even if evidence exists, it may not surface due to internal cultural pressure. This is a powerful narrative device because it makes the claim unfalsifiable in practice. Any lack of evidence can be interpreted as suppression rather than absence. On the other hand, the NHS response introduces a counter-framework, psychological safety, and structured reporting systems. This is equally important rhetorically because it reframes silence not as fear of exposure, but as part of a protected reporting environment. So both sides are now competing over the interpretation of silence itself. Then comes the most critical structural moment in the exchange, the refusal to accept simplified correlation logic. The NHS side repeatedly emphasizes that communication, inequality, and patient harm are interconnected across multiple variables, and that extracting a single causal link would be scientifically and operationally misleading. This is where the debate shifts from political accusation into epistemology, the question of how truth is actually constructed in complex systems. One side demands extractable certainty. The other side responds with systemic ambiguity. And that is why the exchange feels unresolved. Because what is actually being contested is not just policy, it is the legitimacy of different ways of knowing. Is governance driven by direct, simple correlations that can be politically communicated? Or is it driven by complex, multi-layered datasets that resist simple narrative packaging? Finally, the structure of the dialogue itself reinforces the conflict. The repeated interruptions, the procedural language, the appeals to authority, and the invocation of whistleblowers all contribute to a sense of institutional pressure. But beneath that surface drama, the real tension remains unchanged. The inability to reduce a complex public health system into a single politically satisfying metric. And that is the core takeaway of this entire exchange. Not who won the argument, but the fact that modern governance disputes are increasingly defined by a clash between simplified narrative demands and complex systemic explanations that resist simplification. The explosion in tone is not just emotional, it is structural. It comes from two fundamentally different expectations of what truth should look like in a public institution. One demands clarity in a single line. The other can only offer clarity across thousands of interconnected lines.